Welcome to episode 115, Mountains of Doubt. I am your host, Damon Soka. Doubt is a strange phenomenon to the human condition. Think of the last time you doubted something. Probably wasn't that long ago. What caused you to doubt? Was it a simple thought of doubt or feeling of doubt? Did the doubt persist beyond rational explanations? Did the doubt persist because of rational explanations or scientific conclusions or logical inference? Was it something you sought out or simply came into your conscious view? I have personally struggled with doubt much of my life, but not the normal type of doubt where you can simply rationalize it away. I'm talking about the mountains of doubt that come cascading at you over and over again with mental illness. This isn't the type of doubt that kicks at the thoughts around the edges. This is deep, foundational doubt about one's very existence and foundational beliefs. I'm talking about that doubt you have no doubt experienced in your suffering with mental illness. You struggle just to move forward because you don't doubt your foundational beliefs. You doubt everything about yourself, your value to God, your value to the society, your family, and even your value to yourself. You doubt that your effort has any merit or that your existence has any merit. You even begin to doubt others because you can't trust yourself. That is the doubt I want to address today. That deep negative feeling of hopelessness, worthlessness, and sometimes self-pity that comes with the episodes of depression and anxiety. This doubt we will talk about today is actually one of the key obstructions to maintaining a solid spiritual foundation and a testimony of Christ and His gospel when you suffer with mental illness. Now, I have experienced much of this type of doubt throughout my life due to my own personal mental illness episodes. By its very nature, doubt, a force of emotional chemistry and thought, causes deep distress in the body and mind. Now, these moments of distress then lead to action because the body and mind cannot exist within those darkened realms of perplexity and doubt. The mind needs and seeks balance, harmony, and contentment, and knowledge of the truth, because as the scriptures state, men are that they might have joy. We are actually hardwired for joy, not distress and doubt. And so when our body and mind move into that realm of emotional questions, self-doubt, and attempting to find solutions to that distress, our body and mind begin to work in overdrive, attempting to solve the problem, whatever the problem is. The doubt and distress may first manifest itself by various means, such as deep emotional distress, but it was always and continues to be interesting to me just how much physical pain these moments of doubt can and do cause those who suffer. We probably don't talk about it as much as the emotional pain we experience, but I personally always had physical manifestations of this emotional pain along with that deep emotional distress. Pain, physical or emotional, is really the body's method of telling us that we are in distress and that the mind and the body have no intention of continuing their current stressful path. The mind and body want solutions, and the deeper and more divisive the pain is, the more our body and mind seek solutions. And I will add that sometimes our mind and body will latch on to almost anything that might provide even a moment of relief without sometimes serious reflection as to the consequences. Pain is a powerful motivator. If we feel as though our problem that might be that we have chosen to believe in an incorrect truth, and discarding that truth might help, we tend to be quick to do so with the pain, even when that truth might run deep within our foundational system, and even when that truth is true. Pain, especially emotional pain of increasing levels, is a strong motivational source for finding solutions, at least as far as the brain is concerned, no matter the consequences of the solution sometimes. It is from this perspective that one can begin to talk about deep foundational testimonies being discarded in part or whole based on the body and mind's belief that discarding such a truth might afford some limited or even longer relief from the emotional pain. Now, today I'm going to speak from my personal perspective and, of course, those of others who have also experienced similar types of doubting events in their lives, specifically related to mental illness. We know that serious anxiety and or depression brings about chemical changes to the brain and body. For now, I'm really not going to discuss the origin of these changes, although I believe there's a case to be made that the origin is probably very important. These chemical changes brought about by environment, genetics, whatever, force thought patterns, beliefs, and foundational morality into a strange and very unique place. Much of what we hold to be true, we believe to be true. Now, let me explain what I mean by this. For everything we hold true, especially in the spiritual realm, but for everything else in everyday life, we attach what I will call emotional evidence, meaning simply that we have attached feelings, thoughts, emotions to every part and piece of truth we hold to be true. Now, this is true no matter who you are or what you believe. Now, we certainly possess a rational, logical side to what we hold true. And we compare that rational, logical side against scientific evidence, logical reasoning, people who we believe are experts, and so forth. Meaning that if our truth has a quantifiable side to it, we are likely to use that as part of what we believe to be true. Now, our logical, rational side of truth is going to vary based on a host of background information, culture, our preconceived notions, our parents, our education level, and really our life experience with this mortal world. It also depends on how open we are to questioning things, our sources, questioning what we are seeing versus what we've been told, and so forth. One can honestly say that while rational, logical side of our brains in humanity work similar to one another, the outcomes can vary significantly based on our experience, background, and history. One need only to view the current world to see how differently we can interpret logical, rational evidence. But for truth to occur, the rational, logical, spiritual evidence must be mixed with emotional evidence. Now, why is this so? Because the emotional element provides the necessary drive towards action, based on what we believe to be true. Without the emotional element, we are unlikely to use whatever truth we know as part of our everyday lives. We need both the truth and the drive to act. In religious worlds, this drive or emotional motivation is actually referred to as faith. Now, the emotional component solidifies a belief as our belief and part of who we are. Our beliefs make us who we are, especially the foundational ones. That is because we base everything we do in this world on our foundational beliefs. Whether we really believe that or not, it's very true. Kind of like what a business does when they create core values. Now, we don't generally go through the process of conscious evaluation for every moral decision or belief before we act. And that's because our minds create habits, even out of our core beliefs and morals. If we have done something in the past that has worked and continues to work, then over time the mind wants to take that decision out of the processing. It wants to create a habit because it doesn't need to spend more energy deciding upon something that doesn't need a decision. Our minds tend to be very, very good at doing this because of the need for efficiencies. If we had to evaluate every decision, every moral decision, every time it came to us, we would actually overload our minds. We would not be able to function as we do. We need our brains for decisions, actions, and reactions in the present where something might come up that does need our attention. So much of our foundational belief system stays in this habit lane of the brain, and we refer to it when needed or when something unexpected comes our way, and we need to make a judgment. For instance, I, from a very early age, learned and understood that taking other people's things or other resources without permission or payment is theft. For the most part, my moral ideal surrounding theft is well developed, and I don't think about not stealing something at the grocery store. Now, the same is true for many, if not all, of my core beliefs. We have developed our brains to basically run those kinds of questions around the processor and stick with what we know and believe to be true. Now, a more complex situation might occur where I may need to ask myself and then make a judgment, but even then, most of those questions are answered fairly quickly in our brains based on past experience. Our past experience might not be identical to the situation, but close enough to provide the answer we need. Now, naturally, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, my morality over time will develop around the key moral beliefs of the religion, and of course about the Savior. And with time, effort, and some personal revelation, I, like most all of us, have developed a set of routines for the majority of the moral situations I will encounter throughout my normal day. Now, I might be working on shoring up something like charity that I feel needs some improvement, but for the most part, most of my moral decisions run on autopilot. I know that sounds perhaps a little strange, but it is true for every person. Our brains simply cannot function any other way, and so by nature, we've built this rather complex system of beliefs that we run on autopilot, and they make us who we are in almost every possible way. They are deeply associated with our personalities, how we view other people, how we view people with differing beliefs, and sometimes very differing beliefs, and how we judge what comes to us in the form of decisions. Because they make us truly who we are, we tend to defend them with a rigor and level well beyond what might be rational or logical. These moral truths are personal, time-tested, battle-worn, revelation truths that have guided our lives to this point. And to change one or admit one incorrect is to say that we are not whole or that our lives have been built upon a falsehood. Now, when this happens, a crisis tends to occur when one of these core beliefs is brought to the open and we have to evaluate it. We really don't like these crisis moments because, well, change is difficult. And that is no more true than when we are evaluating something that has already become a moral habit. To bring a true moral habit to the forefront and then to cause serious changes to take place takes levels of time and effort and pain our mind and body really don't desire to make, because that will take resources away from the present and current concerns. And really the most efficient path is to stay the course. And so for the most part, we don't make changes until it is obviously necessary that we need to change. Now, core beliefs about moral issues are somewhat different than a belief that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. Moral issues, which really make us who we are, almost always involve what actions should or should not be taken based on a set of, let's say, moral comparisons. For instance, let's take the easy one, thou shalt not murder. Taken straight as written, it could mean a variety of things, but the specific, well-thought-out murder is obviously forbidden. That's really not a tough question. The tougher moral questions often come of more complex circumstances, such as how to judge self-defense or killing someone by accident, not by intent. Now, should each of those receive the same moral judgment as a preconceived murder? Now, our Western society and really religion says no, and most individuals perceive this as true. Self-defense should not be considered murder, and the accidental killing is really dependent upon the negligence of the circumstances. But even then, many of us will differ morally when presented with the same evidence about what we feel is true justice. The important part, though, of our core foundation is that our differences between one another are not subject to consistent reworking, and so those differences really truly become a part of us. We possess this core moral set of beliefs that has a serious emotional component that is very personal to us. As part of this core set of beliefs, we have a set of spiritual experiences that informs us about our beliefs in the spiritual and, of course, the moral. This set of spiritual beliefs are often experiences with the spiritual that we call revelation, inspiration, heavenly communications. These are experiences, feelings, emotions that will make up the core of our testimony of the gospel and often our moral foundations. Our evidence for these experiences are more often rooted in spiritual manifestations, such as feeling the Spirit of the Lord, feeling positive emotions about an experience, feeling joy, feeling comfort, and those gifts of the Spirit that we typically feel. Like we do with physical experiences, we log these spiritual experiences away one by one, and the compounding effect of them, of all these experiences, makes up our testimony of what we believe to be true about gospel doctrine and principles, the atonement of the Savior, our relationship to the divine beings, and our relationship to others. What is important to note about these experiences is that they rarely have foundations in physical phenomena. We generally don't see a burning bush, an angelic apparition, hear a physical voice, or see a miracle. Our spiritual experience takes place in our spirit, and those manifestations then translate over into the feelings chemistry we have in our bodies. Joy, for instance, is both a spiritual and a physical emotional feeling. The brain chemistry will recognize spiritual joy. Now, the same is true for comfort and all of those personal revelation feelings and emotions. It is important to also note how strong these feelings and emotional experiences can be. For some, they can be unforgettable and so poignant that the individual cannot deny they happened, even when faced with serious consequences physically and emotionally. These spiritual foundations, when developed, will run very deep into the belief system and become such a part of the individual that they become indistinguishable from the person, meaning that the person takes on the nature of the moral character. When in fact, this is exactly what we desire for our natures, to be changed to match or emulate the spiritual nature of the Father and the Son. There is something key and important about these moral foundations. Because many of them, if not all of them, were attained by spiritual manifestations of the truth, if the spiritual feelings are removed from the evidence, then doubt is the feeling that follows, meaning that if we walk away from continuously experiencing the spiritual, or in case of the mental illness, have that removed or dimmed from us, we will begin to doubt the evidence ever occurred or that it occurred in the way that we remember it. We require the Spirit to remind us of the emotional evidence and personal revelation. If I can no longer feel the revelation, I am very likely to question it, because the basis of my evidence is the spiritual feeling. When I cannot recall spiritual evidence, experiences, and events emotionally, then I will be unable to feel that spiritual foundation. And when you cannot feel so now, as Alma so eloquently explained in Alma 5, then you will feel lost spiritually. And that lost feeling quickly turns to doubt. Doubt is simply the obscuring of spiritual emotional evidence and the consequences that follow spiritually, emotionally, and chemically in the brain. It is not that we did not have the experience. The experience spiritually is still intact as we experienced it. But because we cannot now feel the emotional evidence, the truth becomes and feels hollow without foundation. Now, this hollow, doubting feeling causes the serious distress of what we spoke of earlier. The body and mind do not like this state of emotional existence and will quickly begin to search for remedies. Now, we now come to the idea of mental illness and what it does to the spiritual foundations that causes us so much doubt and grief. Now, remember that spiritual manifestations trigger emotional chemical feelings in the brain, both positive and, what we haven't discussed, negative. Although I did not state it previously, spiritual manifestations are not all positive, especially when we are headed down a dead-end road. And so we associate negative chemistry in the brain with the spiritual equivalent of you are headed down the wrong road. When the mental illness switches brain chemistry to the negative emotional states, we literally feel as though we have stepped off the straight and narrow path. We have associated those negative feelings for so long with sin or error that when the episode strikes, we begin to believe that we are somehow walking in the wrong spiritual direction. Now, for me, that was personally the exact feeling of depression and anxiety. These feelings cause serious problems in the mind because the mind knows logically and through its habits that it has not altered its path and that it should be feeling positive emotional states, but it isn't. The divide between what we feel, the truth we know, and those habits, and what we are experiencing creates terrible emotional pain, which in turn creates physical pain and other symptoms. When the episode begins or strengthens, two things are really occurring simultaneously. The The first is this switch to negative brain chemistry, and the second is the interaction of the habit-formed moral foundations with this new brain chemistry. Now, the brain relies on the idea that the habits it has formed and created are going to provide joy, happiness, and comfort to the emotional system of the body. When the illness changes the emotional chemistry of the brain, while the brain continues to run the same moral habit routines, then a really pretty serious form of distress occurs. The brain cannot understand why the habits that have worked and become part of this system are not now working. At first, the brain is likely to assume that maybe the episode is temporary or something out of the ordinary. But as the episode continues, the distress over these habit-formed foundational truths becomes more pronounced until one begins to exhibit really truly the symptoms of distress or symptoms of mental illness. Symptoms of mental illness are simply the method the body uses to tell us of this distress. We discussed earlier that the brain does not like to change well-formed habits, and especially the ones that are foundational. We also discussed the connection between spiritual manifestations and a brain chemistry. When the brain feels that negative disconnect, it looks for reassurance of the foundational beliefs that are really the basis for these moral habits, meaning it wants to feel the evidence of the spiritual manifestations of truth. But those feelings are diminished because of the negative feelings that have overtaken the brains. Meaning the brain is looking for the positive feelings that come with our spiritual manifestations of the truth, but those are not possible because of the chemistry changes brought about by the illness. So the mental illness does two things when it changes chemistry. It blocks, or better said, dims the ability for our spiritual evidence to be felt through the brain chemistry and causes the brain to begin to search for answers to these negative feelings. This is the combination that produces that cascade of doubt, that deep doubt, the serious life-altering doubt we feel when we are in episode. Now, this brain search for positive, reinforcing feelings and then also feeling disconcerting negative feelings when it's running our normal moral habit routines causes really a cascade of problems, especially for those whose lives are firmly rooted in the gospel, in spiritual evidences. The longer the episode, the more difficult it becomes to feel spiritual evidences, promptings, revelations, and really everything we need emotionally to keep the moral habits running. Eventually, the brain will begin to reassess the moral patterns and habits, not because our spiritual evidence doesn't exist, because we cannot feel so now. Again, as Alma so eloquently explained. In other words, we haven't lost our testimony. It isn't as accessible as before. Now, this inability to access our spiritual foundation then creates all kinds of problems with typical spiritual behavior. We may not desire to pray, or to read scriptures, or to attend church. Why? Because when we accomplish these behaviors under normal circumstances, we're able to access those spiritual feelings and foundations. But when we do them under the altered negative brain chemistry, they can be difficult to feel, and even worse, our brains can begin to associate the negative feelings with these spiritual activities. And when we have built spiritual habits that bring us joy and peace, then all of a sudden, under the difficulties of a mental illness, they no longer do so. We can become quickly disillusioned and lost. This is often where many individuals begin to doubt testimonies and spiritual evidences that were once a foundation of their lives. It is not that the evidences never existed, nor that they cannot be accessed. It is that for us to maintain them as evidences, we need to feel them emotionally within the brain. Now, I've discussed mental illness is kind of a switch, that somehow we go from positive to negative with the click of a button. Now, everybody knows that is not true. It is only helpful to my discussion today of what's happening with our spiritual testimonies. Episodes are more of a bell curve, starting slowly, then building, and they tend to kind of end the same way. So our spiritual evidences do not get blocked suddenly, but they slowly fade over time. Now, this only adds to the problems and disillusion, as it tends to make one feel as though they are losing their testimony, rather than the chemistry in the brain slowly taking over positive feelings. We can feel them sometimes, these spiritual moments, and often only for moments. For me, that was probably the most difficult part of the episodes. Feeling the spiritual positive feelings, slow a revelation, whatever you want to call them, slowly draining from my life. It made me feel all types of doubts about myself, my testimony, the doctrines of the church, and just about everything in my life came into question. For many, even relationships which do require positive feelings and reinforcement evidences can feel lost or changed. So many things become altered when the brain chemistry turns negative. Beyond all the doubt, it also tends to turn off the motivational sources for everything we once loved to do. It is reasonably easy to understand that if an illness changes your brain chemistry to negative emotional states, then your whole world is going to be turned upside down. The question in all this is, what do you do? How do you maintain any semblance of spirituality or even normal life when mental illness is part of your daily existence? Now, I wish in all of this discussion I've had over these 115 podcasts, I had an easy answer to the question. I suppose if there were one, I think that we would probably know it by now. But that doesn't mean that without an easy answer, there still aren't answers. Now, I've discussed regularly all of the many things one can do to manage mental illness. And there are many good resources to help with this, from clinicians to therapists, even to podcasts like this one. There are, however, some important answers to those of us who hold a firm belief in the Savior and His church. The first of these answers is actually really important. It is that you are not alone. While it may feel like it at times, you are simply not alone. The Savior has allowed for the illness. If the Savior has allowed for illness, then He has allowed for grace. Grace is simply that marvelous gift emanating from the atonement that provides for added strength, power, and ability beyond our capacity. Grace is always present when the Lord has allowed for weakness in the body to occur. We have access to this grace when we ask for it. This doesn't mean that the illness will not be difficult or that we won't feel lost, confused, or lonely. Grace means that the Lord can intervene from time to time and allow us to rest and recover. There exist wise purposes for mental illness in the Lord's evaluation of your life and my life. We may not see them, but He does. However, if we do what we should, the Lord will not give us more than we can handle. Now, we might feel like He does, but I have found that He really doesn't. Even when the world tries to give us more, the Lord will simply increase our ability through grace so that we are not overwhelmed. The second important answer is that your testimony is intact and still available. Once the episode subsides or the Lord gives rest through time, medication, and really all of the other management devices and means, your testimony is actually going to be right where it was before. And you will feel all of those same evidences that brought you to a firm foundation. Too many of us have abandoned testimonies in part or in whole because we can't feel them right now due to the effects of the illness. Sometimes we just need to wait a spell, and all those spiritual memories will eventually return to our lives. And again, we will feel whole. For those who suffer long-term depressions and anxieties, it can feel as though our spirituality and foundations of truth will never return. I have at times in my life been where you are now with longer-term mental illness. My answer to this problem is simply to ask for moments of respite, whether through prayer, through priesthood blessings, fasting, or other means. I have found that the Lord is quite merciful about periods of rest during long-term cycles of mental illness. He can provide restful moments spiritually that allow for refreshing before the trial is to be endured again. My final answer today is to never give up. I suffered deeply for 33 years before the Lord saw fit to end that particular trial of moderate to severe bipolar disorder. Time is an important element in a trial, and when yours is complete, the Lord is very merciful about relieving the suffering. Miracles do occur every day, and sometimes it's just a matter of asking once the trial is complete. May the Lord bless you and keep you in His arms until your trial is ended. Until next week, do your part so that He can do His.